I have two very brief announcements. Chuck Moulton has asked me to announce that there will be a poetry reading at the Wild Blue Yonder on May 6th. Reading will be Gene Jansen, Omer Salinas, and Ernesto Trejo. I'd also like to announce that for this reading, there will be no question and answer period after the reading because of the large number of guests. You want some? Czesław says he wants questions and answers. Very good. Very good. There will be a period of question and answers after the reading. I first encountered the work of Czesław Miłosz sometime near the close of the 1960s in the pages of post-war Polish poetry, an anthology he had also edited and translated. It was something of an eye-opener, for here was a poetry rather unlike what I had expected, notably free of the encrustations of ego or the heavy spirit of alienation, capable of sustaining the weight of intellectual ideas as well as the data of imagery. Above all, it was a poetry of rigorous but controlled intensity. Much later, I was to read Milosz's definition of poetry as the passionate pursuit of the real, a definition not only accurate to what I first felt in his work, but also an act of faith in poetry itself, in its capacity and power as an agent of human aspiration. At the time I first read him, of course, Miłosz had already been a prolific writer for almost 40 years, a late awareness that justifies the wry comment he had made about himself after his arrival in California. He had referred to himself in a poem as wrong, honorable Professor Miłosz, who wrote poems in some unheard of tongue, who will count them anyway. This evening, it is hardly possible to regard him in such a context. He comes here as a man who has won for himself the most distinguished honors that the world can give to a writer, testimony to the largeness and accessibility of his vision. I must confess, however, that I rather like thinking of him as wrong, honorable Professor Miłosz, who writes in some unheard of tongue. It suggests the proper odds against which the poet works, and it points toward individual, personal process, rather than work brought to culmination in the esteem of public applause. Moreover, it retains for me something of an essential quality in the work of a man who all his life has placed his gifts at the service of a restless, severe inquiry into the basic values of human existence. In the preface to the anthology I mentioned, Miłosz had written, quote, "Man confronted with mechanisms beyond his control is a loser until he learns that what seemed to crush him was, in fact, a necessary trial to open a new dimension and to prepare his mind to cope with unheard of circumstances," unquote. The trial, of course, is not conclusive, and Miłosz has noted that in the 20th century, the most simple touchstone for reality is physical pain. And yet, surely his statement is given to hope, not a foolish hope, and not one lacking contradictions, because it places poetry at the center of an existential drama poised between what he has called the sacredness of existence and the human limitations which make us blind. Rich and multiple as it is, the work of Czesław Miłosz is a constant testing ground of the real, frequently painful and sobering, but created in a spirit of reverence and humility. And so I offer one last quote from one of his poems. The human mind is splendid, lips powerful, and the summons so great it must open paradise. Czesław.
Last time I read poetry here 8 years ago. It was before the Nobel Prize. And I find old friends here. I am introduced by old friends. I'm going to read the first of all, do you hear me? No? Doesn't work? Oh. I hope that you will hear me. I'm going to read my poetry in translation. I translate my poems myself together with friends of mine, of late poets, Californian poets, Robert Haas and Robert Pinsky, who already is a Californian poet. My new book of poems which just appeared, Unattainable Earth, is a sort of an experiment, because looking for a, as I said, more spacious form, I mix poems, prose fragments, even fragments from letters, quotations from various authors in one volume. Because there is a convention that you gather volumes in one, you gather poems in one volume, but why to follow that convention? Not necessary. So I would open my reading with a fragment in prose about poetry. Since my youth, I have tried to capture in words a reality such as I contemplated walking the streets of a human city, and I have never succeeded. That is why each of my poems seems to me the token of an accomplished oeuvre. I learned early that language doesn't adhere to what we really are, that we move in a big make-believe which is maintained by books and pages of newsprint. And every one of my efforts to say something real ended the same way, by my being driven back to the enclosure of four, as if I were a sheep straying from the flock. And so this is for the beginning, and I would read the poem, which for me is a sort of also philosophical confession. The poem, short poem in prose, which is entitled Esse. The poem, the action takes place in a Parisian metro. I looked at that face, dumbfounded. The lights of metro stations flew by. I didn't notice them. What can be done if our sight lacks absolute power to devour objects ecstatically in an instant, leaving nothing more than the void of an ideal form, a sign like a hieroglyph simplified from the drawing of an animal or bird? A slightly snub nose, a high brow with slickly brushed back hair, the line of the chin. But why isn't the power of sight absolute? And in a whiteness tinged with pink, two sculpted holes containing a dark, lustrous lava. To absorb that face, but to have it simultaneously against the background of all spring boughs, walls, waves, in its weeping, its laughter, moving it back 15 years, or ahead 30. To have. It is not even a desire. like a butterfly, a fish, the stem of a plant, only more mysterious. And so it befell me that after so many attempts at naming the word, I am able only to repeat, harping on one string, the highest, the unique avowal, beyond which no power can attain. I am, she is. Shout, blow the trumpets, making 1,000-strong marches, leap, rend your clothing, repeating only is. She got out at respite. I was left behind with the immensity of existing things, a sponge, suffering because it cannot saturate itself, a river, suffering because reflections of clouds and trees are not clouds and trees. Maybe I should read, since we are in Paris, city where I lived long time, maybe I should read you another poem on Paris. When I was a young beginning poet, Paris was the capital of the world still. And every young budding poet was supposed to go there for a shorter or longer apprenticeship. So when I was a student, I went for the first time to Paris, and then many years later, I wrote the following poem. Rue Descartes. By passing Rue Descartes, I descended toward the Seine, shy, a traveler, a young barbarian, just come to the capital of the world. We were many, from Esse and Koloshvar, Vilno and Bucharest, Saigon and Marrakesh, ashamed to remember the customs of our homes, about which nobody here should ever be told. The clapping for servants, barefooted girls hurry in, dividing food with incantations, choral prayers recited by master and household together. I had left the cloudy provinces behind. I entered the universal, dazzled and desired. Soon enough, many from Esse and Koloshvar or Saigon or Marrakesh would be killed because they wanted to abolish the customs of their homes. Soon enough, their peers were seizing power in order to kill in the name of the universal beautiful ideas. Meanwhile, the city behaved in accordance with its nature, rustling with throaty laughter in the dark, baking long breads and pouring wine into clay pitchers, buying fish, lemons, and garlic at street markets, indifferent as it was to honor and shame and greatness and glory, because that had been done already and had transformed itself into monuments representing nobody knows whom, into arias, hardly audible, and into turns of speech. Again, I leaned on the rough granite of the embankment, as if I had returned from travels through the underworlds, and suddenly saw in the light the reeling wheel of the seasons, where empires have fallen, and those once living are now dead. There is no capital of the world, neither here nor anywhere else, and the abolished customs are restored to their small fame. And now I know that the time of human generations is not like the time of the earth. As to my heavy sins, I remember one most vividly. How one day, walking on a forest path along a stream, I pushed a rock down onto a water snake coiled in the grass. And what I have met with in life was the just punishment, which reaches sooner or later the breaker of a taboo. American readers interpret the end of this poem as something violating a taboo of respect for life. No, this is purely historical, because I come from Lithuania, where the water snake was a sacred creature. So to harm a water snake was really breaking a taboo. Now, I read my poems from several of my volumes, including the newest one. But I have also some poems written recently after this book was set. And I am going to read a poem entitled "In a Jar." I often refer in my poems to my childhood. Now, with all my knowledge, honorable newts, I approach the jar in which you live and see how you float up vertically to the surface, showing your bellies of vermilion color of flame, that makes you akin to the alchemist salamander living in fire. Perhaps that's the reason why I caught you in a pond between pines when white April clouds raise, and carried you to town, proud of my trophy. You vanished so long ago. I ponder the moment when you lived unaware of hours and years. I address you, I give you existence, even a name and a title in the princedom of grammar, to protect you by inflection from nothingness. Myself no doubt held by powers who observe me and transfer me to some grammatical hyperform, while I wait with the hope that they seize me and carry me up, so that I last like an alchemist's salamander in fire. And maybe I should read you a poem. I wrote of late 2 poems about Mary Magdalene. One I'm going to read. I had the second, but I'd somewhere lost it. Before Mary Magdalene, albescent in the dusk, a scarf. The candle flickers. Which of her lovers is this dried up bone? She doesn't try to guess. She remains like that for an age or two in meditation, while sand in the hourglass has fallen asleep, because once she saw and felt on her shoulder the touch of his hand. Then, at daybreak, when she exclaimed, "Rabboni," I gathered dreams of the scarf, for I am it, impetuous, enamored, suffering in the gardens, under a dark window, uncertain whether it's mine, and for no one else the secret of her pleasure. Raptures, solemn oaths, she doesn't quite remember. And only that moment persists unrevoked, when she was almost on the other side. Now I'm going to read maybe... I have written poems of, let us say, deeply concerned with the events of the 20th century. Not very successful, I should say. I tried my best. Here is a poem on that subject entitled "Preparation." Still one more year of preparation. Tomorrow, at the latest, I'll start working on a great book in which my century will appear as it really was. The sun will rise over the righteous and the wicked. Springs and autumns will unerringly return. In a wet thicket, a thrush will build his nest lined with clay, and foxes will learn their foxy natures. And that will be the subject with addenda. Thus, armies, running across frozen plains, shouting a curse in a many-voiced chorus. The cannon of a tank growing immense at the corner of a street. The ride at dusk into a camp with watchtowers and barbed wire. No, it won't happen tomorrow. In 5 or 10 years, I still think too much about the mothers and ask what is man born of woman. He curls himself up and protects his head while he is kicked by heavy boots. On fire and running, he burns with bright flame. A bulldozer sweeps him into a clay pit. Her child, embracing a teddy bear, conceived in ecstasy. I haven't learned yet to speak as I should, calmly. Some short poems, short pieces in prose. In my dream, I was traveling, probably by car, through a hilly countryside, little valleys where everyday life is lived, a so-so one. And a voice reproached me for squandering my time on trifles, instead of writing about the essence of life, which is so-so-ness. Probably all my voyages in dreams have a model in one, very real, by cart from Raudonka on the Vilno-Yashuni road for a kermes in Turgiele. A sandy road with ruts, always either up or down, stubble fields on hills in the sun, here and there a spruce grove, then alders by streams, huts, well sweeps. There is a poem entitled Consciousness, which is composed by, that's a series of very short poems, but united by the same title. Maybe I risk to. A few days ago, we read that poem with my co-translator Bob Haas at Black Oak Bookstore in Berkeley, but on 2 voices. He read one poem, I read one. And this makes good for reading 2 voices like that. But I will risk now reading myself on. First, consciousness enclosed in itself every separate birch, and the woods of New Hampshire covered in May with green haze. The faces of people are in it without number, the courses of planets and things past, and a portent of the future. Then one should extract from it what one can, slowly, not trusting anybody. And it won't be much, for language is weak. Second, it is alien and useless to the hot lands of the living. Leaves renew themselves, birds celebrate their nuptials without its help. And a couple on the bank of a river feel their bodies draw close right now, possessed by a nameless power. 3. I think that I am here on this earth to present a report on it, but to whom I don't know. As if I were sent so that whatever takes place has meaning because it changes into memory. 4. Fat and lean, old and young, male and female, carrying bags and valises, they defile in the corridors of an airport. And suddenly I feel it is impossible. It is the reverse side of a gobelin, and behind there is the other, which explains everything. 5. Now, not any time here in America, I try to isolate what matters to me most. I neither absolve nor condemn myself. The torments of a boy who wanted to be nice and spent a number of years at the project. The shame of whispering to the confessional grill behind which heavy breath and a hot ear. The monstrance undressed from its patterned robe, a little sun rimmed with sculptured rays. Evening devotions of the household in May, litanies to the maiden, mother of the Creator. And I, conscience, contain the orchestra of regimental brasses on which the mustachioed ones blew for the elevation, and musket volleys on Easter Saturday night when the cold dawn had hardly reddened. I am fond of sumptuous garments and disguises, even if there is no truth in the painted Jesus. Sometimes believing, sometimes not believing. With others, like myself, I unite in worship. Into the labyrinth of gilded Baroque cornices, I penetrate, called by the saints of the Lord. I make my pilgrimage to the miraculous places where a spring spurted suddenly from rock. I enter the common childishness and brittleness of the sons and daughters of the human tribe, and I preserve faithfully the prayer in the cathedral, Jesus Christ, Son of God, enlighten me, a sinner. 6. I, consciousness, originate in skin, smooth or covered with tickets of hair. The stubby cheek, the pubis, the groin, are mine exclusively, though not only mine. And at the same instant, he or she, consciousness, examines its body in a mirror, recognizing a familiar, just not quite its own. Do I, when I touch one flesh in the mirror, touch every flesh, learn consciousness of the other, or perhaps not at all, and it, unattainable, perceives in its own, strictly its own, manner? 7. You will never know what I feel, she said, because you are feeling me and are not filled. 8. The warmth of dogs and the essence inscrutable of doggishness. Yet I feel it in the lolling of the humid tongue, in the melancholy velvet of the eyes, in the scent of fur, different from our own, yet related. Our humanness becomes more marked then, the common one, pulsating, slavering, hairy, though for the dogs it is we who are like gods, disappearing in crystal palaces of reason, busy with activities beyond comprehension. I want to believe that the forces above us, engaged in doings we cannot imitate, touch our cheeks and our hair sometimes, and feel in themselves this poor flesh and blood. Certainly, I didn't reveal what I really thought. Why should I reveal it? To multiply misunderstandings? And reveal to whom? They are born, they mature, in a long pause and refuse to know what comes later. Anyway, I won't avert anything. All my life, it was like that. To know and not to be able to avert. I must give them reason. They have no use for lives lived sometime in the future, and the torments of their descendants are not their concern. I wonder now, let me think, what should I read now? Okay, well, I should read a couple of short philosophical poems. One poem about my philosophical Weltanschauung in 6 lines. If I had to tell what the world is for me, I would take a hamster or a hedgehog or a mole and place him in a theater seat one evening, and bringing my ear close to his humid snout, would listen to what he says about the spotlights, sounds of the music, and movements of the dance. Another philosophical poem, perhaps, which is called, in the original in Polish, there is in one word designating the quality of being a magpie. And with my co-translator, we didn't know how to translate it and translated it as Magpiety. And this is a philosophical poem dealing, in fact, with the question of universals, the central problem of medieval philosophy. Namely the question whether ideas of things precede existence of things, or things precede the existence of ideas. If we take, for instance, a dog, whether the idea of the dog existed before concrete dogs, or concrete dogs first exist and then the idea sort of put together with all the existing dogs. It's the same with magpie, of course, and with human beings. The same and not quite the same, I walked through oak forests, amazed that my muse, Mnemosyne, has in no way diminished my amazement. A magpie was screeching, and I said, Magpiety, what is magpiety? I shall never achieve a magpie heart, a hairy nostril over the beak, a flight that always renews just when coming down, and so I shall never comprehend magpiety. If, however, magpiety doesn't exist, my nature doesn't exist either. Who would have guessed that centuries later I would invent the question of universals? Maybe I should read a poem, Bobo's Metamorphosis. As I said, many of my poems are inspired by my readings as a child and what surrounded me as a child. And one of those readings was a book about a boy who misbehaved. As a punishment, a fairy changed him into a fly for one afternoon. And so many years later, I wrote that poem, Bobo's Metamorphosis. Bobo, a nasty boy, was changed into a fly. In accordance with the right of the flies, he washed himself by a rock of sugar and ran vertically in caves of cheese. He flew through a window into the bright garden. There, indomitable fairy boats of leaves carried a drop taut with the excess of its rainbow. Mossy parks grew by ponds of light in the mountains of bark, and acrid dust was falling from flexible columns inside cinnabar flowers. And though it didn't last longer than from tea time till supper, later on, when he had pressed trousers and a trimmed moustache, he always thought, holding a glass of liquor, that he was cheating them, for a fly shouldn't discuss the nation and productivity. A woman facing him was a volcanic peak, where there were ravines, craters, and in hollows of lava, the movement of earth was tilting crooked trunks of pines. Well, I guess maybe I should read the only poem in my life which I have written in English directly. That was because I had a long conversation with Raja Rao, a Hindu writer and philosopher, who is a Brahmin, and he wanted to convince me that Oriental wisdom, wisdom of his guru, is like wisdom of Greece. There is a continuation, and I should be converted to Oriental wisdom. The conversation took place in Austin, Texas. Then I came back to Berkeley and I wrote a letter to him, and or a poem in the form of a letter, or vice versa, and of course in English, because I couldn't write it in any other language. Besides, I don't know. He writes in English, but he knows languages of India. I don't. So here it is to Raja Rao. Raja, I wish I knew the cause of that malady. For years I couldn't accept the place I was in. I felt I should be somewhere else. A city, trees, human voices lack the quality of presence. I would live by the hope of moving on. Somewhere else there was a city of real presence, of real trees and voices, and friendship, and love. Link, if you wish, my peculiar case on the border of schizophrenia to the messianic hope of my civilization. Ill at ease in the tyranny, ill at ease in the republic. In the one I longed for freedom, in the other for the end of corruption, building in my mind a permanent polis, forever deprived of aimless bustle. I learned at last to say, this is my home, here, before the glowing core of ocean sunsets, on the shore which faces the shores of your Asia, in a great republic, moderately corrupt. Raja, this didn't cure me of my guilt and shame, a shame of failing to be what I should have been. The image of myself grows gigantic on the wall, and against it my miserable shadow. That's how I came to believe in original sin, which is nothing but the first victory of the ego. Tormented by my ego, deluded by it, I give you, as you see, a ready argument. I hear you saying that liberation is possible, and that Socratic wisdom is identical with your gurus. No, Raja. I must start from what I am. I am those monsters which visit my dreams and reveal to me my hidden essence. If I am sick, there is no proof whatsoever that man is a healthy creature. Greece had to lose her pure consciousness, had to make our agony only more acute. We needed God loving us in our weakness and not in the glory of beatitude. No help, Raja. My part is agony, struggle, abjection, self-love, and self-hate, prayer for the kingdom, and reading Pascal. Well, I guess I should read a couple of poems which illustrate difficulties of translating. Bob Haas and Pinsky, Bob Pinsky maybe even better in both. They compete in a way. Sometimes they succeed in rendering the difficult patterns, especially, usually I write poetry without rhymes, but sometimes with rhymes, especially when I write stylized poems, imitating the 18th century poetry, for instance. And then I use meter and rhymes, and they are difficult to translate. I am going to read a few samples of that. I don't remember who translated it. Probably Bob Haas. No, both. I cannot give credit to one of them. I would read for you. Probably very few people understand here Polish. There are some. Few? No, I do not see any. But just for the sound, yes, for the sound, I would. Cannot find it. Right. I'm not very much at home in my books. Probably. I'm sorry because I. Oh my goodness! I don't know. I don't know. I'll find. Must have somewhere. Yeah. Here it is. Those are somewhat stylized, so kind of elegies. In the original would be litość i zrozumienie w wysokiej mamy cenie, no bo co? Pycha ciała i sława, pocałunki brawa, komu to? Medykowie, prawnicy, oficerowie śliczni, w czarnej jamie, futra, rzęsy, obrączki, ukłony w słońcu pomszy, odpoczywanie, dobranoc, piersi parzyste, śnicie sny wiekuiste, bez pająków. Understanding and pity, we value them highly, what else? Beauty and kisses, fame and its prizes, who cares? Doctors and lawyers, well-turned-out majors, 6 feet of earth, rings, furs and lashes, glances at masses, rest in peace. Sweet twin breaths, good night, slip through to the light without spider. And another is even more difficult to translate because every stanza has 3 rhymes. Kiedy żalu się pozbyłem i chwały, którą goniłem, tego, czym nigdy nie byłem, nad kraje, góry, zatoki niosły mnie gryfy i smoki, przypadki albo wyroki. When I got rid of grieving and the glory I was seeking, which I had no business doing, I was carried by dragons over countries, bays and mountains, by fate or by what happens. Oh yes, I wanted to be me. I tossed at mirrors weepily and learned my own stupidity. From nails, mucous membrane, lungs, liver, bowels and spleen, whose house is made, mine. So what else is new? I am not my own friend. Time cuts me in two. Monuments covered with snow accept my gift. I wonder, and where? Well, I have to look at my watch. And maybe I should read since we are with translations with rhyme, there are some poems with which my co-translators cannot cope. And I have to translate myself. And so there is a poem, Poet at 70, which is a very frank avowal. Those who know Faust of Goethe necessarily Dr. Faustus of Marlowe, but not the beginning, the complaint, the sort of complaint of old Faust. We'll see, we'll find here affinity. Thus, brother theologian, here you are, connoisseur of heavens and abysses, year after year perfecting your art, choosing bookish wisdom for your mistress, only to discover you wander in the dark. I, humiliated to the bone by tricks that crafty reason plays, you searched for peace in human homes, but they, like sailboats, glide away, their goal and port, alas, unknown. You sit in taverns drinking wine, pleased by the hubbub and the din. Voices grow loud and then decline, as if played out by a machine, and you accept your quarantine. On this sad earth, no time to grieve. Love potions every spring are brewing. Your heart in magic finds relief. The Lenten dirges cut your queen, and as you learn how to forgive. Voracious, frivolous, and dazed, as if your time were without end, you run around and loudly praise theatrum, where the flesh pretends to win the game of nights and days. In plumes and scales to fly and crawl, put on mascara, fluffy dresses, attempt to play like beast and fowl, forgetting interstellar spaces. Try, my philosopher, this world. And all your wisdom came to nothing, though many years you worked and strived, with only one reward and trophy, your happiness to be alive, and sorrow that your life is closing. Now, I have a few minutes more. Yes? More minutes of life. Yes? Yeah. Then I have two poems on the subject of the table. Table 1. Only this table is certain, heavy, of massive wood, at which we are feasting as others have before us, sensing under the varnish the touch of other fingers. Everything else is doubtful. We too, appearing for a moment in the guise of men and or women, why either or, in preordained dress. I stare at her as if for the first time, and at him, and at her, so that I can recall them in what unearthly latitude or kingdom, preparing myself for what moment, for what departure from among the ashes, if I am here and tired, if I am cutting meat in this tavern, by the wobbly splendor of the sea. Table 2. In a tavern, by the wobbly splendor of the sea, I move as in an aquarium, aware of disappearing, for we are all so mortal that we hardly live. I am pleased by this union, even if funereal, of sights, gestures, touches, now and in ages past. I believed my entreaties would bring time to a standstill. I learned compliance as others did before me. And I only examine what endures here, the knives with horn handles, the tin basins, blue porcelain, strong though brittle, and like a rock, embattled in the floor and polished to a gloss, this table of heavy wood. Or as to life, yeah, very short poem about cafeteria. My parents, my husband, my brother, my sister. I am listening in a cafeteria at breakfast. The women's voices rustle, fulfill themselves in a ritual, no doubt necessary. I glance sidelong at their moving lips, and I delight in being here on earth for one more moment with them here on earth to celebrate our tiny, tiny My-Ness. I guess I have to finish, probably that's time. Just one of my prose fragments. To find my home in one sentence, concise, as if hammered in metal, not to enchant anybody, not to earn a lasting name in posterity, an unnamed need for order, for rhythm, for form, which three words are opposed to chaos and nothingness. Thank you. Questions now? Okay.
Do you have questions now? Rather than waiting for a little bit, let's have questions now for a while. And then the floor is open, please. They're afraid of you, Czesław.
That's a wrong perspective. No, you can ask questions. My goodness, the most. But which one? Huh? The first poem in Birth in Winter. Encounter. Yes, this poem was written in 36. So count. Half a century ago. So is it true? Half a century? So one can write poetry for half a century? Encounter. We were riding through frozen fields in a wagon at dawn. A red wing rose in the darkness, and suddenly a hare ran across the road. One of us pointed to it with his hand. That was long ago. Today, neither of them is alive, not the hare, nor the man who made the gesture. Oh, my love, where are they? Where are they going? The flash of a hand, streak of movement, rustle of pebbles. I ask, not out of sorrow, but in wonder. Yes. I like that poem. I still like the poem, which is very rare. That you like a poem written so long ago. In view of the amount of nonsense you have happened to write in your life. Yes. That's what?
The bumblebees and hummingbirds. I noticed many images to those two things. I wondered.
Hummingbird?
And bumblebees.
Bumblebees. Yeah.
I just wondered if that was favorite things yours or
I can tell you. Bumblebees belong to the folklore of my childhood because, I was always intrigued by bumblebees. Sort of very strange airplanes. And the hummingbirds, of course, from California, from America. This is a new, and I should say that those two phenomena or creatures can illustrate combination in my poetry of Lithuania and California, two coming together. Yes. Yes. No, I translate. I translate because I have I feel that I have a ear for my type of poetry, and I can reconstruct the written. Since they do not know the language, they cannot do that. And then either Haas or Pinsky, or of late Leonard Nathan, we work on my translation. Of late, they introduce less and less corrections. They say that I am quite good in this. And as to translation, my translations into English, I asked a question. I posed the following question to Kenneth Rexroth, whom I knew. You know who was Kenneth Rexroth, late Kenneth Rexroth. I asked Kenneth, I don't understand why my translations, for instance, in my anthology, Post-War Polish Poetry, or translations of other poets, are considered good because I am not of English language. He said, well, if somebody has the ear for one language, has the ear for all languages. I don't know whether it is true, but he said that. But I do not pretend to have a mastery of English. So I have always, I need a control of friends who work on my lines. Well, I consider that being systematic is very important for a writer. And whether you are able to write one line or one word, or more, you should sit and have a very well regulated life. And I work systematically in the morning. Not necessarily on one thing, because I have several things which I do at the same time. If I am not good in this, I can be better in something else.
How long is that time
Hello?
How long do you create?
How long? There is absolutely no rule. I am very often surprised. There are some poems which have been written, jotted down in 2 minutes, and they proved to be important poems. Originally not intended. Very important is not to think about publication and about such things. Sometimes the best poems are jotted down for myself only, saying, all right, other things I write for publication, but this I would write for myself. And sometimes they prove to be very good poems. And on the other hand, some good poems can be written when you work systematically for a very long time, moving slowly. So there is no rule. And bad poems can be jotted down in 2 minutes, or very bad poems can be worked a long time. Yeah.
Have you found any Russian poets to be especially influential in your work?
Well, I happen to know Russian language. Even at the end of the Second World War, when I served as an interpreter, I risked to be shot by the Soviet soldiers because they asked with suspicion, how it happens that you know Russian so well, huh? So maybe I was white Russian emigre, or I don't know, or spy or something. So I knew Russian poets, but always that was a romance with serious reservations, primarily of linguistic nature, because Russian language is has a tendency to iambic, very strong beat. And if you take Pushkin, of course, which is primarily an example, and I found that writing in a language with big accents, that sort of influence is unhealthy. The competition with Russian language is unhealthy. And besides, Russians are so bound by that imperative of rhythm that they cannot liberate themselves from meter and rhyme till today. They have great difficulty with that. But while other languages, free verse, so to say, fits them perfectly. Not usually. If you take a poet who certainly, in my opinion, is the major poet, Russian poet of the 20th century, Mandelstam, Osip Mandelstam, he wrote in classical meter and rhyme. So there was sort of several reservations. Of course, I went through fascinations, for instance, with Yesenin, not very much with Mayakovsky, though I used to recite poems of Mayakovsky too, yes. В ней Бог пег, медленно лет арба, наш Бог бег, сердце наш права. Yes. They have mixed feelings. They published my poems in some 100,000 copies, which disappeared in more 150,000 disappeared in a day, and ideologically they are opposed to Miłosz because there is no agreement with us, but occasionally when a state publishing house wants to earn money, they overcome ideological reservations.
Influenced to what extent by American poetry? Do you believe that poetry of American?
I don't hear you very well. And I doubt whether it will hear you.
Do you feel like your poetry is heavily influenced by American poetry?
Influences in poetry, you absorb everything which surrounds you. And I cannot really tell exactly to what extent living in America and reading American poets transformed my own poetry. This is like nature in a way. If you read poetry, certainly I feel affinity. I feel affinities with American poetry more than with, let us say, with French poetry of today, though I know the language. But I found in America certain, accomplishment of certain dreams of my adolescence about Walt Whitman. I have been influenced by Walt Whitman very early, knowing Walt Whitman in translation only. Yes? I would much prefer, yes. No, all I know, I have been thinking about distortions, innumerable distortions. I know that my image will be completely distorted, that it would have very little to do with reality. And since I assume that, I don't care.